What's up, YouTube? This is the first 66% society video. This channel will be mainly about informational topics and what's going on in the world around us, hopefully providing people with some more facts and info to learn about topics that are important and not everyone seems to know about. Um, the topic today is about the conflict or war in Sudan, which doesn't seem to be getting much at all media coverage or attention from people, which it 100% deserves a lot more. So a little background on Sudan is that it's in northeastern Africa. It's one of the largest countries on the continent. The population is predominantly Muslim, and the country's official languages are Arabic and English. Before the war started, Sudan was considered one of the poorest countries in the world. Its 46 million population was maintaining an annual income of about $750 per person in 2022. Even though it is a gold producing country and has a lot of gold mines. The wealth of the country has been flawed for some times due to things such as limited infrastructure, food insecurity such as droughts, conflict, and instability, which we'll get into. But it mostly all stems back to colonial intervention. Many of the country's issues and African issues come from the history of governments overextending their power and exacerbating these issues that are found in Africa. This could be a whole topic and video in itself, the history of colonialism and outside powers in Africa. But that's not today's topic, and even though it deserves a lot of attention too, that's just not what we're going to get into today. Back to the central topic, the current conflict has greatly worsened the wealth of the country. In 2024, Sudan's finance minister said state revenues had shrunk about 80%. So getting into all the conflict information and how it all started, in 1989, Omar al-Bashir led a group supported by the National Islamic Front in a military coup against the government. This led to al-Bashir maintaining control as the president in Sudan, being elected 3 times in elections that definitely seemed apparent with electoral fraud. A lot more can be said about Omar al-Bashir, such as his negotiations to end the Second Sudanese Civil War, which led to the separation and creation of South Sudan, or how in 2009 he was the first sitting head of state to be indicted by the International Crime Committee for supposedly directing a campaign of killing, raping, and pillaging against citizens within Darfur. Sorry if I mispronounce any names or words today. That is not my intention. I'm just white. However, the main point today is the current Sudanese conflict and not just Omar al-Bashir. So the two sides. The current conflict began to develop in 2019 when Omar al-Bashir was ousted from his hold on power. Citizens led huge street protests calling for an end to his reign, and the army mounted a coup to finally get rid of him. After this action, a joint military-civilian government was created but later overthrown in October 2021 by another coup. This coup was led and staged by 2 men that are now in the center of the current conflict. General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the head of the armed forces and in effect the country's president, and his deputy, RSF leader, General Muhammad Hamdan Dagalo. But who are the RSF? RSF stands for Rapid Support Forces. The RSF developed from a ragtag Arab militia, typically called the Janjaweed. The Janjaweed developed and played a large role in the 2003 to 2005 Darfur war and massacres. Al-Bashir then formalized them into a paramilitary force called the Border Intelligence Units. One brigade included Muhammad Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemeti, due to his baby face, and Hemeti meaning a mother's endearing term for little Muhammad. In 2007, when Hemeti and his troops weren't paid by the government, they became discontented and felt exploited. Hemeti and his troops then switched sides and promised to fight Khartoum and attempted to cut deals with Darfur rebels. This led to Hemeti returning to Khartoum when he was offered a deal: payback for his troops, higher rank for him and his officers, and a large cash payment. In 2013, the new paramilitary force, the RSF, was formed under Hemedti. The army chief was against this due to his beliefs that the money should go towards strengthening the regular forces in their army. The RSF then became even closer with al-Bashir. Training camps were set up and trucks were imported and fit with machine guns, all supported by al-Bashir. RSF troops continued to fight for several causes, but were often seen as undisciplined troops that kind of came out of nowhere, developing from the militia. But the RSF continues to have played a large role in the past of Sudan. It has much information behind it, but once again, that is not the overall point in this video. And yeah. So after the coup in 2021, General Burhan and General Dagalo, or Hemedti, began to disagree on the future of Sudan, the proposed move of changing to civilian rule. One main point in the conflict was the plan to incorporate the 100,000 RSF individuals into the army, and then who would be in control of this new large power. Both generals didn't want to lose their power, wealth, or influence, and it later led to the conflict. On April 15, 2023, after days of tension due to RSF members being redeployed across the country, which the army then saw as a threat, shooting began between the two sides. People sort of dispute over who fired the first bullet, but the fighting quickly escalated and grew. The RSF then seized much of Khartoum, which it held on to until the army regained control in March 2025. The Sudan army controls most of the north and east, and its main ally is Egypt, because the wealth of both countries are then intertwined due to sharing that border and the water of the Nile River. General Burhan has been using Port Sudan on the Red Sea as his base of operations and the UN-recognized government of Sudan. The RSF has been accountable for major acts of injustice within Sudan, such as their siege on al-Fashir, in which lasted over 18 months. The siege led to hundreds of casualties, overwhelming the hospitals and blocking food supplies. The RSF even then built an earthen wall to surround the city to trap the residents and starve out the city's citizens. They also then destroyed the nearby Zamzam displacement camp, which had already been suffering from famine due to the RSF. After the army recaptured Khartoum in March of 2025, they found it to be run down with blackened and burnt down banks, government ministries, and whole blocks of office buildings that were in ruins. What is taking place in Sudan by the RSF is a genocide. The RSF are conducting a genocide The RSF are conducting a genocide against Darfur and Sudan, against the Masalit people and other non-Arab communities. This information comes from last year or so. Numbers are most likely still increasing, which they are 100% still increasing today. But thousands had been killed in El Janina city in a campaign of ethnic cleansing with the mission of at least having them leave the region. In March 2024, UNICEF, the UN Children's Agency, gave gruesome accounts of armed RSF men raping and sexually assaulting children as young as 1. This has led to some of the children even attempting to end their life instead of living through this misery. In January 2025, the U.S. confirmed that what was happening in Sudan was indeed a genocide being committed by the RSF. In my opinion, it didn't need confirming, but I'm glad the U.S. agrees. Then Secretary of State Anthony Blinken was quoted saying, "The RSF and allied militias have systematically murdered men and boys, even infants, on an ethnic basis, and deliberately targeted women and girls from certain ethnic groups for rape and other forms of brutal sexual violence. Those same militias have targeted fleeing citizens, murdering innocent people trying to escape conflict, and prevented remaining civilians from accessing life-saving supplies. Based on this information, I have now concluded that members of the RSF and allied militias have committed a genocide in Sudan," he added. Sudan's government attempted to file a case against the UAE in the International Court of Justice, accusing it of supporting the RSF by funding, arming, and in turn supporting the genocide. The ICJ, the International Court of Justice, refused to hear the case, saying that they had no jurisdiction, which in my opinion is terribly unjust, as the UAE is very much in fault in supporting the RSF. Now, this doesn't mean that the army, the other side against the RSF, are completely in the right, because they have committed acts of injustice and still support an improper government that the people do not want. The Sudanese citizens have attempted to take up arms, though, with the army and fight the RSF, but this is still the army and government that they were fighting against before the war. The Sudanese citizens are victims of a war with two sides that they do not wish to support but have no choice. They have been caught between an unjust government and army, but it is either fight with them and fight back or be caught with a genocidal militia. This has led to many citizens taking up arms and fighting physically back against the RSF. They hope that when the RSF is driven out, civilian-led action will take place within the government. Who's supporting both of these countries? We'll now get into a little bit of that. The UAE, as mentioned before, the United Arab Emirates, are the main backers of the RSF. The UAE was formed in 1971 due to direct intervention by the US and the United Kingdom. The UAE was built up by the US in order to secure US interests, such as protecting US oil routes and acting as an enforcer over the Middle East. The UAE received weapons, military training, and political backing. This ensured that the Emirati royal families would continue to hold power without being challenged, which in turn allowed them to continue to support U.S. Western interests. Overall, the U.S. and UAE relationship was built to take advantage of oil and profit off of each other, while others suffered because of this relationship. The UAE began to try and expand through the pillaging of Africa. This took forms such as smuggling minerals out of the Democratic Republic of Congo, funding wars in Libya, to land grabs in the Horn of Africa. After the assassination of Omar al-Bashir, the UAE saw its opportunity and the RSF to politically back them and attempt to gain power and control in Sudan. The UAE supported the RSF with weapons and resources to, in return, extract and receive gold from Sudan's gold mines. As mentioned before, the major ally of the army is Egypt. However, Egypt has major connections still with the UAE, which leads to difficult relationships with the army. They can't fully support them without hurting relationships with the RSF, or relationships with the UAE, which in return goes back to the RSF. So Egypt's in a bad spot too, and they can't really help either side, even though it's the army they should be helping, and I think they do help more of. But Saudi Arabia is also said to have relationships and connections with both sides, but is typically noted as an army ally, but still not fully on the army side. In conclusion, or overall, what is happening in Sudan is a genocide administered and conducted by the RSF. The RSF pushes to gain control over Sudan and push out and murder citizens that it feels are unwelcome. The RSF is backed and supported by the UAE in return for its resources. The UAE then has major ties to the US, who help create the country in order to support oil profits, and maintain a powerful ally in the Middle East. What is happening in Sudan deserves major attention from everyone, but doesn't seem to receive the time needed on the news or in media or in any form of communication. Sudan citizens are suffering and forced to fight for a government that they were protesting against, all due to the fact that they need to, in order to survive and have a future in which they can hopefully have a government created and run by the civilians that they wanted in the first place. This all stems from neocolonialism in pursuit of resources by foreign powers. This has led to the crippling of Sudan and the conflict, which has resulted in an estimated death toll of 150,000 and displacement of 16 million as of December. This information deserves to be known and action should be taken in order to help Sudan. I attempted to explain as much as I could without going on and on, because it is a large and informational heavy topic. I apologize if I'm missing any major points or any of my information is partly faulty. I obviously don't believe that any of it is, but there were a lot of information, some with contradicting messages, but overall, it should all be correct. I'm not giving away bad information, I believe. I also apologize once again, if I butchered any names or anything, as this was obviously not my intentions. I hope you all have a great rest of your day and continue to learn more about this genocide and its injustice that is harming the Sudanese people. Also, if you have any suggestions, please comment them down below and maybe check out the other 66% channels. Hope you all have a great rest of your day again, and see you later.